We are all very well aware of the cost of drugs, and it is a challenge for some with health insurance where sometimes the copay may be higher than the cash price of the medication that they are being dispensed. And unfortunately, through contracts with pharmacy benefit managers, pharmacists cannot proactively explain that to a patient. A patient currently has to ask their pharmacist about that situation, and most do not realize that they should be doing that.
There's a high proportion of every $100 that goes into spends on drugs, $24 is administration. $15 goes to the pharmacy to dispense, optimize use, et cetera, et cetera. So part of this whole clinical integration conversation is how do we create a different way of getting paid for drugs? How do we create a different set of incentives and leverage so that we're not just dispensing pharmacies, we're healthcare service providers that happen to dispense and use that dispensing activity as a way of engaging the patient.
PBM, or a prescription benefit manager, is an entity that's hired usually by an insurance company to manage the prescription benefit. When a patient walks into the pharmacy, they present their insurance card, and they don't know what happens from that point on, but 15, 20 minutes later, out comes the prescription and what they're going to pay. So the PBM actually interacts between the pharmacy, verifying eligibility, not only the patient but the drug, with the insurance plan. And so they're the go-between, the entity that's there. And they serve a valuable purpose, in all honesty. I think the challenge has been, though, is that as the prescription drug market has grown dramatically, whether it's the cost of medications, the increased number of utilizers, and everyone's focused on the cost of prescription drugs, there's been a lot of things outside of the human eye that have been going on where the PBMs are negotiating supposedly better pricing. The question is for who? Some of the health plans are starting to question that relationship now. The pharmaceutical manufacturers are starting to question those arrangements, and government is starting to question those arrangements. And listen, there's nothing wrong with anybody making a buck. The bottom line is we don't even know who's making the buck at this stage of the game. And with all the pressures on healthcare, as we see health insurance premiums come out of every individual's paychecks, it really requires the highest level of scrutiny, which is why I've been pushing for years for greater transparency of PBMs and to hold them responsible as fiduciaries. The challenge is that some entities, those who execute agreements with these PBMs, don't really understand the terms and conditions that they're engaging with. So therefore, the PBM is actually exercising the rights under the contract, and the entities don't know any better. But as more and more examples are starting to come out, it's very clear that whether they're called incentives for payment or disincentives for payments, there's definitely an inequity that's going on, and that at the end of the day, people still want their right to choose a pharmacy, but they do not want predatory reimbursement impacting which pharmacy they can go to.
How is this affecting the cost that the patient pays and the pharmacist reimbursement?
At the end of the day, one can only guess that a lot of payment has been going on for prescriptions that is excessive. And at the end of the day, the health insurance plans have no other option than to look at what they're going to charge in rates for premiums or what they're going to charge in co-payments. And a very common thing I see now more than ever before is differing copay structures, and they're not going down, they're going up. So it affects the consumer at the counter.
A pharmacy benefit manager is an entity that acts in the middle between the pharmacy and the drug manufacturer and the patient's insurance plan. What they're supposed to do is to make markets for the drugs so that the consumer enjoys better pricing. But in fact, what we've seen happening since they've become prominent in this line is increasing drug prices and increasing drug shortages. There's no transparency with pharmacy benefit managers. A consumer doesn't know who their pharmacy benefit manager is. A consumer has no choice over who their pharmacy benefit manager is. And there's been allegations that these companies have been taking money improperly from the manufacturers and from the retailers and not passing that along to the consumer.
What do you feel needs to happen?
I think there needs to be more oversight. Perhaps the role of the PBM is overstated, but I think the first thing we should have is some oversight.
Unfortunately, medication's not getting any less expensive. And, we deal with that as pharmacists, as providers, in the sense that we have to purchase and maintain an inventory and then dispense that to the patient and be paid for that. But it also affects our patient because they have to pay for it as well, whether it's through an increasing copay or a high deductible healthcare plan where they may not have drug coverage until they spend a significant amount of money out of pocket. So it's been a true potential barrier for care. So our patients are concerned about it, pharmacists are concerned about it, and we do everything we can to work with patients and providers to ensure that we keep their costs as low as possible.
There's a merger between CVS, which is a drug chain, and APBM, Pharmacy Benefit Manager, and they have placed a bid to acquire one of the major health insurers in our state, Aetna. The concerns that I have relating to this is that there's tremendous consolidation that this merger would represent. I believe that they could have very, very negative consumer effects. There would be reduced choice. There would be the same people that are collecting the premium telling you what pharmaceuticals and what therapeutics you can have, and they might even be directing you to patients to their own healthcare providers. One of the things that I've observed about America is that consumer choice tends to drive innovation, and this clearly has a negative impact on consumer choice, and I fear on innovation in healthcare.